Hey everyone, Bandit here. Have you heard the legend? The legend of the living, traveling, inanimate object with a warrior's heart and gentleman's character that longs for the thrill of combat? If you spent any time at all looking at the characters of Elden Ring, you've probably come across the giant living warrior known as Alexander, the Jar. Alexander is truly the Siegfried of Katarina of this game, and just like the warrior onion, the warrior Jar also has determination that comes from elements outside our knowledge and also has a rather tragic ending to his story. But what is his story? Where did he come from, and why is he unrelentingly venturing across the land in search of combat? I'm so glad you asked, because surprise, surprise, you just so happened to click on Alexander's Story Explained video, which is a video that will explain Alexander's story in a way that anyone can understand, and which also just so happens to have spoilers in it. Just saying, you've been warned. The segment of Alexander's story that we can play through in-game isn't really that complex, but allow me to recap it here so that everyone's on the same page. When you meet Alexander in the game, you first come across the thick boy halfway stuck in the ground, and upon your meeting he will ask you to smack his hindquarters as hard as you can to pop him out of his sedentary prison. After you pop him out with a good Walloper 5, he once again introduces himself as Iron Fist Alexander and explains that he is on his way to Redmane Castle in the far southeast in order to further his education in the ways of war, which is exactly what he does. You meet up with him again down under in said Red Castle, and he's gearing up to take part in the festival. You know, that big happy party that's thrown once every so often to try to recruit heroes of the land to kill the rampaging General Radahn. Alexander states that he is excited to take on the legendary warrior and is one of the spirits you can summon in the battle. After you defeat the big guy on your 20th attempt or so, you can find Alexander nearby, shuffling around in the dirt. You talk to him and he states that he was wounded by Radahn and then hid for the rest of the fight, something that he is ashamed of. But then he says he hasn't given up on getting stronger yet and explains that he's trying to stuff the bodies of other warriors from the Shattering War that died there in that spot down into his body in order to level up his strength stat or something. Ironically, it's implied that he even stuffs the body of Star Scourge Radahn himself into him, since if you're a monster and you kill Alexander before this point in time, he drops the Warrior Jar Shard, which states that it's made from the relics of ancient warriors, also confirming that he stuffs ancient warrior bodies into himself. However, if you kill him after his quest is over, he drops the Shard of Alexander instead, which adds some info and says that some of the relics were from a red-haired champion. Since we've seen him scooping up the bodies around Radahn's battleground, it's pretty much confirmed that at this point, he was indeed dumping some pieces of Radahn into himself. Probably his head. Anyway, after the somewhat disturbing battleground scene, you then leave him and find him once again stuck in a hole. And after oiling him up and helping him out again, he mentions that he fell into that blasted hole because he was trying to catch a glimpse of his home. The home that he vowed to never return to, but we'll get to that in a sec. He mentions he's heading up to the fiery mountain in the north to bake himself into something harder by way of lava, and when you also head that way, you find him just chilling in the middle of actual molten rock, yelling a bit out of pain, but otherwise doing pretty well. He notices you and gifts you with a jar of your very own to wear on your head, something he crafted for you as a token of his friendship. Then he says this fire ain't hot enough, it's just lukewarm, and that he's going to instead go temper himself in the legendary fires of the Flame of Ruin, which for you lore experts out there should sound pretty familiar. And this is why you can then summon him again for the fight against the fire giant who was guarding the Flame of Ruin before you killed him, after which you now have access to said Flame of Ruin, and apparently using the flame transports you to the timeless city held in midair called the Crumbling Faramazula, because whether you let Melina light the flame using her body as kindling or you do it yourself in the path of the frenzied flame, you end up in Faramazula either way, meaning doing this equals portal to here. Anyway, apparently Alexander also tried to use the frenzied flame to temper himself because you run into him up there. But this unfortunately marks the last time your paths will cross, because his path ends here. You see, the whole time you've been meeting up with Alexander at different points in the game, he always says that he wants to fight stronger champions in order to become stronger himself, right? But the strongest champion he's ever seen is standing right in front of him. It's you. So he formally asks you if you would do him the honor of facing him in mortal combat, which ends, of course, with your victory. After the battle, lying on the ground moments from death, he says he knew he never really stood a chance against you, but that he was glad he got to go out the warrior's way. And with one last hearty chuckle, he shatters completely, leaving behind the shard of Alexander that I spoke about earlier, and a bloody clump of his insides. And while this marks the tragic end of Iron Fist Alexander's story, what about its beginning? Is there any way to find out more about where he came came from and why he was so obsessed with becoming a strong warrior? Absolutely there is. If you travel to the eastern region of Liurnia, at the bottom of a cliff that is much too tall for any normal being to descend without carefully stepping from one outcrop to the next, you will find a hidden village that is not accessible any other way. This quaint little village is called Jarburg, and it is the home of the living jars that Alexander came from and vowed to never return to. But unlike the other soul jars you come across in the game that either try to punch you or blow you up or otherwise end your existence, the jars of Jarburg are all 100% friendly, docile, and downright adorable citizens of the lands between. You'll find them lying about, idly chatting with one another, and even dancing around flowers. They're so cute. One of these jars in particular is a youth named Jar Bairn, who you can actually walk up to and speak with. The little jar affectionately refers to you as Cuz, short for cousin, and asks if you're there to be the new potentate of Jarburg. Potentate means leader, by the way, but will then deny you your potency on account of your not having smooth hands. Should have been using lotion. Before too long, Jar Bairn will ask you if you've met Uncle Alexander and will then explain to you that Alexander used to live there, in Jarburg, but then left to become a champion and insisted that the path of the champion must be taken alone, and in classic Alexander fashion vowed to never again return home. His bravery and heroic ambition inspired the little Jar Bairn, who admits to you secretly that he too is a warrior jar and one day will also leave the village to become strong just like his Uncle Alexander.
Please don't tell anyone, Cuz. But I'm actually a warrior jar as well.
But why should these jars living in essentially jar heaven leave? Are they just getting bored? Well, possibly, but Jar Bairn also gives us some insight into this question. He eventually asks you if you've heard of the poachers who hunt down living jars and smash them up for their pieces. This is actually the very reason that the jars established the little isolated town of Jarburg. It's kept hidden and secret and out of general knowledge so that the poachers won't find them and will therefore let them be. Jar Bairn says that he hopes Alexander will beat them all up, which implies that this might have been the reason for Alexander's quest of trial by combat. You see, as you could imagine, these little living jars are quite special. They're magical, and according to what we can read about the description of the look-alike cracked and ritual pots, the materials of the jars themselves can literally mend when broken, literally giving them the name living jars. This makes the jar's material quite valuable and able to be used to make various different magically augmented concoctions. Now, how the jars came into existence in the first place isn't something that's confirmed in the game, but we can speculate a couple different theories on the subject. For instance, we know that before Radagon's rise to power as king, there were colosseums scattered throughout the lands between that housed, combat stuff. Ritualistic warfare done in reverence and honor of the Erd Tree. And right outside the Colosseum of Caelid is a colossal warrior jar called the Great Jar. We also see loads of empty or broken jars around several different minor Erd Trees, and the jar's lids are always ordained with depictions of the Erd Tree, and the roots of the Erd Tree are shown to be feeding off of the bodies of dead humans, which is a whole other rabbit hole of lore that we don't have time to get into at this point. But to add to this point, when you die in the game, a sprout of a golden tree, an Erd Tree, appears at the spot where you died until you collect your runes from it, implying that the Erd Trees themselves live off of death. It could be that since Marika removed the rune of death and therefore natural death itself from the world as part of her golden order, the jars were created to bring the bodies of warrior who fell in the ritual combat of the Colosseums to the minor Erd Trees in order to provide nourishment to the new tree sprouts, and recycle them into grace for the rest of the citizens of the lands between. A method of cycling life under Queen Marika the Eternal. Like I said though, this is just one of a few different theories of how the living jars came to be, all of which are pretty speculative, so for the time being, I digress. Back on topic though, even if the soul jars were potentially created as a way to house the dead and water the Erd Trees, why are they being poached for their materials? Is business really just that good right now? Well, I'm inclined to say no, seeing as merchants that we can find throughout the lands between haven't seen a customer in ages. On the other hand, ages ago, there was this little war called the Shattering. In the war, several things which were previously outlawed or shunned were brought into focus and exploited for the purposes of war, such as the art of making weaponized perfume, also known as aromatics. The war led to a bunch bunch of perfumers being drafted into combat, and therefore made this practice a widely exploited tactic and led to the rise and demand of certain types of perfumes such as the spark and iron jar aromatics. The iron jar aromatic is a bit unique because not only does it raise a user's poise while rendering them more vulnerable to lightning, but just like the name implies, it is made through use of shards of living jars, which means that jars have to be killed and harvested in order for these to be made. It says right in the description that perfumers are plainly in league with jar poachers. This means that essentially jars became hunted for their bodies as a result of the Shattering War. And as a result of being hunted, most of the soul jars then decided that they would make use of the warrior bodies within them and become warriors themselves, and would fight back against those who would do them harm, which is why you find them in deep dark crypts and other hiding places where they're hostile towards you, when otherwise they used to be peaceful before the war. They simply want to live and don't know whether you're friend or foe and decide to attack you before they themselves are attacked. This is what led to the jars escaping and finding and founding the isolated town of Jarburg, where they could live peacefully. Only, unfortunately, once again, the story of Jarburg does not end well. While you're traveling, you can stop by every now and then and talk to Jar Baron and get the latest scoop on what's going on around town. Eventually, you discover that that old coward of House Hoslow, Dialos, has come to town to be their potentate, which is something he feels will finally give him purpose because, come on, how hard can it be to look after some harmless little jar people, right? Well, fast forward a bit, and one day you return to find everyone smashed and killed. All except for Jar Baron, who tells you that a poacher found their town after all and came in to extract their valuable skin. But he doesn't cry because he's a strong little warrior.
I won't cry though. I'm a warrior jar. A warrior.
You then find Dialos lying in the middle of the road, having fought off the poacher at the cost of his own life. After the genocide of literally everyone in Jarburg aside from Jar Baron, he decides to take off and become a warrior jar just like his uncle Alexander. You can then give him Alexander's innards, which Jar Baron claims he will stuff into himself when he is worthy. After which, he says goodbye and sets off, never to be seen again, leaving behind the companion jar talisman, a token of his friendship. And that, my friends, is the story of Alexander the Warrior Jar and the little town of Jarburg. Now that everyone's good and depressed, let me thank you for watching. Please leave a like if you enjoyed this video or the effort that I put into making it and digging through all this sad lore. And trust me, with this game, every piece of lore is painstakingly pieced together by way of many different item descriptions. And subscribe if you haven't already to stick around for much more content and to avenge the deaths of the jars of Jarburg. Thank you as always to my bandit crew, of which I am honored to welcome Cindy H into. You guys always cheer me up. That's all I've got for this one, so as always, I hope you have a wonderful rest of your day. This is Bandit, looking forward to seeing you next time and signing out, and hey, go watch a funny movie or SpongeBob or something like that to cheer up. Peace!